Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, 13 American servicemen dead in Afghanistan. Louisiana and the Gulf Coast is taking precautions for Hurricane Ida for Sunday. And the FDA approves Pfizer as a vaccine for COVID. That and more tonight, all on Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, and welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. I hope your week went well. I'm Andre Laborde. Our goal is bringing Wall Street to your street for today, for Friday, August the 27th, 2021, and to get you ready for the week ahead. Tonight, we're going to be talking with one of the advisors and architects of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Well, it's better known as the Trump tax cuts. Steve Moore. Steve was also on the Wall Street Journal's editorial board. He's the author of many books. He writes numerous columns and is a senior fellow at FreedomWorks. Steve is also sought after for his opinions on financial shows, as we sought him out here on the show. And we'll be talking with Steve Moore in just a moment. But first, how did the markets do this week? Well, the Dow Jones Industrial Average ended the week at 35,455, up 242 points for the day and up almost 1% for the week. And the S&P 500 closed today at 4,509, up 39 points for the day and up 1.5% for the week. And finally, the NASDAQ. They finished the week at 15,129, up 183 points for the day and up 2.8% for the week. And this week, Bank of America Securities upgraded Peloton to a buy with a new price target at $138 a share. Also, analysts at Evercore have raised their outlook for Apple to an outperform with a higher price target of $180 a share. Well, my guest this evening is an economist. He's an author of many books, including his latest one, Trumponomics. He's the former Wall Street Journal editorial board member and is also a senior fellow at FreedomWorks. Stephen Moore is my guest tonight, and he's here with us now. Hi, Steve. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
A pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Steve, I'd love to just get right into it with you. Right now with the $1 trillion infrastructure bill that has been passed by the Senate, that's just sitting in the House collecting dust. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we're in the midst of the greatest spending spree and the most fiscal irresponsibility maybe in the history of Washington. This is a disgrace what's happening in Washington right now. The massive amounts of multi-trillions of dollars of borrowing. You know, this is the third bill. So we started in March with the $1.9 trillion blue state bailout bill, money that went to California, New York, Illinois, all these Democratic-run states. And then about 2 weeks ago, the Senate passed a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, but it's really a green energy bill. And then they're now working on a $3.5 trillion bill. So if you add up all these numbers, you're talking about somewhere between $6 and $6.5 trillion of additional additions to our national debt, a massive spending spree. This is going to be, in my opinion, financially catastrophic if this all comes to pass. Now, there's going to be quite a fight ahead over the course of the next 4 or 5 or 6 weeks to see whether the Democrats can muster the votes to get this. But I'll tell you one thing, I'll be doing everything I can as a citizen and as an economist and as a policy person trying to stop this Titanic that's about to hit an iceberg.
Sure. Do you think, Steve, that it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it all boils down to two senators, Kristen Sinema out of Arizona and also Joe Manchin out of West Virginia. I mean, you're in that area and with your ear closer to the what's going on. I mean, do you think that they're going to hold, or the pressure that they're getting from the Democrat caucus to go ahead and to vote? Because they're going to be doing it through reconciliation, which for our viewers, you won't need 60 votes. All you have to have is 50 plus Kamala Harris. What have you heard?
So I think, first of all, people have to know that how horrendous this bill is. I mean, it's basically free everything, free health care, free childcare, free kindergarten, free community college. We're going to provide free food to people. We're going to provide free child subsidies of $300 a month per child. We're going to provide, there's provisions that would increase the IRS budget by $400 billion, which by $40 billion, which would mean 80,000 new IRS agents. Doesn't that sound wonderful? And then you have the provision that's going to try to abolish state right to work laws. So that would force millions of Americans to join a union against their will. You're talking about, I mean, I could go on and on, but this is a really, really bad bill filled with left-wing, ideas that make the Great Society look like a picnic. Mm-hmm. Now, do you think that in the end of the day, the Democrats will pass a reconciliation bill? I think it's highly likely they will. But I think there's so much opposition among the American people to this bill from both sides of the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. Everyone knows that this is financially catastrophic to rack up this amount of debt. $20 trillion of new debt over the next 20 years would just ruin America. And so I think that you're going to see a smaller bill pass. And don't forget, I didn't include the $2 trillion tax increase here, which includes a higher capital gains tax, higher dividend taxes, higher small business taxes, higher death taxes.
When you talk about higher taxes, oh no one under $400,000 will pay a penny of taxes. Well, first off, the way it's describing is that it's no individual making under $400,000 when actually it's a couple making $400,000. But the taxes are passed down. That's like saying corporations pay taxes and not people pay taxes. That's right. So that's going to be
great point.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, you're right that companies don't pay taxes. The people who work for the companies and the consumers pay those taxes, right? Because all of those get passed on to the final consumer. Mm-hmm. But also, I love this idea. Joe Biden continues to say, I'm not raising tax on anybody who makes like less than $400,000. And yet every one of us, whether you make $20,000 or $200,000 or $2 million a year, you're already paying what I call the Biden inflation tax, which is that inflation is running now at 5.5%, in large part because of the massive amount of spending and borrowing we're doing. We're basically, dropping $100 bills out of the windows of helicopters, and that means more money, and that cheapens the dollars that you have. It reduces your paycheck. It means the savings you have gets depleted because we're spending so much money and borrowing so much money. And so, if anybody who goes to the gas tank, anybody who goes to the grocery store, anybody who goes to the hardware store, anybody who buys an airline ticket, and anybody who wants to go to a hotel or buy, rent a used car, that's the inflation is up 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% on those kinds of things. That's a tax. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the people the hardest. By the way, that's low-income people who are paying that tax, not high-income people.
Yeah. And that's a very good point, because it is a tax that Congress does not have to vote on. And like for our viewers, let's say if it's a 5% tax, and let's say on $100, there's $5 on a $100. With inflation, let's say inflation goes to $150. Well, that 5% of $100 is 5. That 5% on 150, and help me with my math, I think that's $7.50. So it's a tax that Congress does not have to vote on, but they do make more money. Steve, there was an article in this week's Wall Street Journal where grocers are having a hard time of stocking the shelves. But with money just being poured into the economy, whether it be through the Federal Reserves and such, as an economist, what is it that you call when there's too few goods chasing too much money? Is that a leading question?
That's called the dreaded I word. That's called inflation, and that's Economics 100, right? Anybody who's had Economic 100 class in high school knows that. But I was shocked by Joe Biden the other day. He was asked, "What are you going to do about the inflation problem?" And he said, "Well, the first thing Congress should do is pass my $3.5 trillion spending bill." I'm like, how in the world is spending and borrowing reduce inflation? I mean, that's like saying, I've got the solution to the forest fire problem in California. We dump gasoline on it.
Dump gas. It's just a talking point right now. And it is just, it's the amazing thing. I read a report where there's right now 5 trillion in money markets and cash reserves sitting on the sideline. And before the pandemic, there was 4 trillion. So that means there's a 20% increase. And I can easily understand that because with the Federal Reserve buying $120 billion a month in bonds, and with $300 extra a month stimulus money, and with other money being pumped into the economy, I can easily understand why there's 5 trillion. So with bottlenecks right now, do you think I guess the word of the day, Steve, is transitory? I used to think of it was temporary. Do you think this? Do you think that this inflation going on right now is just a bottleneck that is going to be a temporary, or do you think this inflation is here to stay?
I think that we're at the start of an inflationary period that could be like the 1970s. And you and I are old enough to remember the 70s when every time you went to the
very well,
store,
yeah,
higher sticker price on because things just kept going up and up in prices. And by the way, the Democrats remember that too, and they remember that that's what killed the Jimmy Carter presidency, and it's one of the major factors that caused Ronald Reagan to become president, one of our greatest presidents ever. But Carter could not get inflation under control, and if consumers could feel the squeeze of inflation. Mm-hmm. And to go back to your analogy, it's like if you make, $100 a week, and then you're used to paying, say, $100 a week for groceries. Then you go to the grocery store, and now everything costs $120. You don't have the money to cover your bills. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's an economic problem. It's a big political problem for Democrats. Now, on the other hand, as you know, the bond market is certainly not signaling rampant inflation right now. I think the financial markets believe that inflation is temporary, but I'm not so sure they have it right. And especially if we pass this additional $3.5 trillion spending bill.
True. Well, that's true. Also, the Federal Reserve is saying that they're now looking at possibly at their next meetings to start tapering down of the.
And I think they should.
Oh, and I understand.
I think they should.
I mean,
yeah.
they're just.
I mean, I think it's
with helicopters dumping money out.
It's a cautionary principle, that you, as you know, I was actually nominated by Donald Trump to be on the Federal Reserve Board. It's the last thing the Fed wanted with someone like me. I'd be raising holy hell if I were over there right now.
Well, I saw there were a lot of senators that were raising holy hell. They did not want you sitting at that table with Jay Powell.
That's exactly right. That's because I would have said, look, the purpose of the Fed is to keep inflation under control. Mm-hmm. And they're not doing a very good job of it right now. And I think it's time to, pull back some of this money mm-hmm. and make sure that inflation doesn't happen. But the most important thing by far is to try to reduce the cost of this massive spending spree. Everyone knows that the repercussions of this will be very negative. Maybe not now, maybe not next year or the year after. But every baby born in America today, if that spending bill goes through, will be paying $600,000 just for the debt that we've incurred. Mm-hmm. That's child abuse. Kids. I mean, why would we do that to our children and grandchildren? We're living beyond our means. It's like if you have a credit card, you can't just keep going and charging more and more money to your credit card and then think, oh, you're going to be fine. You're going to have to pay off that credit card, and then you have to pay the interest on the credit card. Well, that's exactly what we're doing in Washington right now.
Yeah. Well, Steve, isn't that always the problem? I mean, I always say when you touch a hot stove, you have an immediate reaction, but of heat. Bad, hurt. But when it comes to something like this, when they say, well, now you've got $50,000 of debt for every man, woman, and child, or $100,000 of debt, because if you jump out of a 40-story building, you don't really feel it until you hit the bottom floor.
That's so true. I've been saying the same. I've been using that same analogy. It's like, oh, everything's going just fine when you're down to the fourth floor. Just wait till you hit the bottom. And I think. I hope I'm wrong. I'm rooting for America. I want to get out of this crisis. Trump deserves a lot of credit for the vaccine that really has changed everything. And, the economy looks strong to me for the rest of this year. I think because we got businesses reopened, we got workers going back to work, and earning a paycheck. I think that's very positive. So I think this year is looking really good. I worry about what I call the debt hangover effect of what happens in 2022 and 2023. And, somebody has to point to me any time in history where a massive government spending spree actually helped the economy. I mean, you look at Argentina, you look at Bolivia, you look at Venezuela, you look at Mexico, you look at Zimbabwe, you look at Greece. All of these countries spend and spend and spend. using what they call modern monetary theory, that you can just keep borrowing, and all those countries went bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
So I pray that doesn't happen in the United States, but there are laws of economics, there's laws of finance, there's laws of common sense, and we are violating all of those right now.
Yeah, and it has gotten to be a problem. How do you see this new Delta variant, and in relation to what we're talking about right now with the economy? I mean, right now there are companies that bosses are saying that, again, I bring up, there was an article in this week's Wall Street Journal on some bosses are saying that we're not going to be having a return to work for at least another year. Well, that makes 2 years now, because of last March 20th to this March 20th, and now we're already, about to head into September of 2021. So how do you see this Delta variant in relation to what we're talking of?
Well, the bad news is that it's highly infectious, and we've seen a lot of people get infected by the Delta variant, and many people are hospitalized. The good news, the death rates are way down. It's interesting when they show in the paper, they show caseloads, they show hospitalizations. What they don't show is that deaths are much, 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 way, 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 way down from where they were last year. So thank God for that. But people are nervous about it. You are seeing additional social distancing requirements. You're seeing some business shutdowns. I hope that we don't go back to that, because lockdowns were one of the greatest mistakes our country ever made. They didn't work. They didn't reduce the spread. They did not, reduce the infection rate from the virus. We were completely ineffective. We know that from states that did shut down their economy did not have better results than states that kept open. And so, but this is a potential problem, obviously a health problem, but it's also a potential problem for the economy, because if we see more lockdowns, that's going to be really negative for the economy. But I think we're going to get past this. I think the vaccine looks to be effective. People might have to get another booster shot. But for the most part,
FDA,
I think
this week, the FDA just approved Pfizer, possibly, hopefully, those that were waiting on whether or not to be able to take it. Yes. And I know a lot of employers, just for their liability standards, were waiting for an FDA approval before they could mandate it for their employees. And Pfizer.
Yeah. And I just want to, I just want to make another point, though, which is related to your question. I do think that the way we work, how we work, where we work will change forever. I don't think that the normal 9-to-5 job of people getting on the train and going into work downtown Manhattan or into San Francisco or Chicago, my hometown, and then transporting back, I think it's going to be very different. I've been working basically at home now for the last year at least, and I'm not going to be going back into the office 5 days a week. I think it's changed. This interview we're doing right now, it's a function of the new technology that I don't have to be in a studio. I don't have to go downtown to do this. And so that's going to cause, I think, a lot of problems for people with commercial real estate. But I think it also could make our economy even more productive as more and more people are telecommuting from home and being more productive. I've saved 2 hours a day from not having to commute.
That's true. Yeah, very good point. I had a couple of weeks ago, I had Oscar Munoz on, and Oscar was the former CEO of United Airlines. And I asked him that question because when it comes to business travel, especially younger and newer account reps, you have to go and personally meet that client and cultivate that relationship as compared to somebody that's been in. And he was talking about hoping that, because air travel is so important, and I'm not talking about the vacationer, because that's good right now, but that business travel as well as the hotelier.
I want to mention one other thing that I meant to state when you were asking me about this reconciliation bill. We didn't talk about the tax increase, and I know this is a show that's mostly watched by investors. And this is a massive tax increase on investors. It increases dividend taxes. It increases capital gains taxes. It would get rid of the step-up basis at death on capital gains, so that you would have to pay. So when someone with some wealth dies and wants to pass that on to their children, they'd have to pay a massive additional death tax. We would have a higher business tax rate than China, which makes no sense to me. We want to have the lowest tax rates in the world. We would go back to being one of the highest tax rate countries in the world. So I think from a competitiveness standpoint, this bill is a disaster. Ronald Reagan taught us 40 years ago. It was exactly 40 years ago that we passed his famous tax cut, which brought tax rates down from 70% eventually down to 28%. We had the biggest boom you ever saw in this country. And then Trump basically cut tax rates too. We had another big boom in our country.
We're talking with Steve Moore. We're going to be talking with him more about taxes, about this $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill, and a lot more coming up right after this. Steve Moore is with us. We're talking about the economy. Steve, before we left for the break, we were talking about the taxes that not many people, and I'd like to continue where you left off on that, but also, in addition to that, buried in that $3.5 trillion bill that's going on, I almost want to want to say that infrastructure bill, but it's not infrastructure. There's a mileage tax that for people that drive, that especially we were talking before about account reps, salespeople, people that are in your car quite a bit, that it'll be registering that as far as you will have to pay mileage. Is that true?
There is talk of that, and there's been talk about in the bill taking it out. So I don't know the current status of it, but it is on the table. And I disagree with that almost from a privacy standpoint. I don't know. I don't want the government to know where I'm going, how much mileage I'm putting on my car. I mean, that seems like a kind of 1984 Orwellian kind of device to keep track of where Americans are. So I'm not at all happy with that idea. But, the left believes that in the next 20 years, everybody's going to be driving electric vehicles. I think that's highly, highly doubtful. 20% of people who buy electric vehicles turn them in because they don't like them. And Americans have a love affair with the combustible engine. They love their Mustangs and they love their BMWs, and they love the cars they drive right now. So I think it's going to be very difficult. I think we're going to continue to use gas and oil and other fossil fuels for at least the next 30 or 40 or 50 years. So.
And also, as an interesting part, about 80% of the lithium that comes from lithium-ion batteries from the EV comes from China. And the other 20%, a good portion of that, came from Afghanistan. We don't have any holes on China, and now we certainly don't have any holes on Afghanistan. So the fact of EVs is going to be a very coming from a Louisiana area. That is a very high fossil fuel type of like Texas. I don't think they're going to be able to make that 2035 or 2038 type of a goal.
No, they're not going to come anywhere close.
Yeah.
Only 2% of the cars on the road today are electrical. So even if they were to increase those by 20% per year, or even by 2050, you'd still have about half the cars on the road at least being normal, conventional cars. But there is a war against American energy in this administration. You're feeling it there in Louisiana, which is an oil-producing state, Texas, North Dakota. And, we're just playing into the hands of the Saudis. I believe we're playing into the hands of the Chinese when we raise our tax rates higher than they do. It's a competitive world. I don't think Joe understands that. We're not just competing, amongst ourselves. We're competing against the Brits, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Saudis, all of these other countries that would love to knock us off our pedestal. And I've always said that America is obviously the greatest country in the history of the world. The only thing that can knock us off our pedestal is if we do it to ourselves.
You were talking about taxes, and one of the things of corporate taxes was dropped to a 21% tax rate. Now, I know the Biden administration wants to raise it to a 28% tax rate. Well, even if they get it, what will this affect corporations and the economy if it goes from a 28 to a 25 or even to 28 of what Joe Biden wants? What type of scenario will occur?
Well, look, countries compete on the basis of taxes. That's why what Janet Yellen wants is this terrible idea of a global tax. They want to create a tax cartel so that countries can't compete on the basis of taxes. Well, that's stupid. We want, if you believe in freedom and limited government, as I do, and the out of control government is the greatest threat to freedom, then you want countries to compete. That's what keeps them honest. And so this idea of having a global tax, I think, is a dismal idea. But other countries aren't going to comply with that. So Ireland, which has the lowest corporate tax in the world, it's one of the things that really led to its renaissance, was because they have a 12.5% corporate tax. Think about this: if they're at 12.5% and we go up to 25 or 30%, well, we're twice as high as they are. So you're going to get businesses moving to Dublin and out of the United States. And when I was very proud when Trump was president, and I helped put together that tax plan, we imported trillions of dollars from around the world. We created jobs, factories, businesses here in the United States, higher wage jobs, because we brought so much money and construction back into this country. I worry that now it's going to depart if we pass this big tax increase. So it'll be a fight.
I understand. Steve, I hope you would come back.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me. Great show.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it so much. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. You can always write us at andre@wallstreetwrapup.info. Keep it pithy or concise. We'll be glad to answer your questions. And now for a look ahead for next week. But first, what country produces the most coffee? Well, we'll have that answer in just a moment. Well, what country produces the most coffee? Brazil. In 2020, the country produced 7.8 billion pounds of coffee and has held that position of number one for more than 150 years. Well, in the weeks ahead, we've got some great guests coming up we want you to watch. We'll be talking with the chairman of Forbes Communication and publisher of Forbes magazine, Steve Forbes. And also coming up in September, we'll have the president of the National Urban League, Mark Morial. Also, in the events of the happening of Afghanistan and the suicide attacks, we're going to be talking with Eric Prince. Now, you may not know his name, but Eric was a former Navy SEAL. And after getting out of the Navy, he founded a security company called Blackwater, which had furnished security for the CIA, the State Department, ambassadors, and governments around the world. Eric told me he's a little busy right now with the events in Afghanistan, trying to get people out, and he only has a couple of more days, but he'll be glad to join us and to explain what's ahead for Afghanistan, for tourism, and what's ahead for the United States. Eric Prince will be joining us in a few weeks. Well, and by the way, next week, we'll be having our financial advisor from Morgan Stanley's managing director, Jim Spiro. Jim was picked by Barron's as one of the top 100 financial advisors in the United States, and Forbes magazine picked Jim as the best in-state financial advisor of 2020. Jim Spiro will be here next week. So remember, we repeat the shows on Sunday mornings, but the best way is to set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that's our show for Friday, August 27th, 2021. Hope you enjoyed it. My thanks to Steve Moore for joining us this evening, and my special thanks to you for allowing us into your homes tonight. Remember, you can always follow us on Facebook and WYES.org. So be safe this weekend with possible Hurricane Ida in the path for a lot of our viewers. Be safe and take precautions. Have a great and safe weekend and an even better week ahead. I'll see you next week. For Wall Street Wrap-Up, I'm Andre Laborde. And remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.